Qualitative analysis is an important task in HCI research. For example, at CHI 2019, 62% of the papers used qualitative methods. In a typical qualitative research workflow, researchers first collect data using methods like interviews and focus groups. These data are then transcribed into a textual format, and these transcripts are annotated in order to develop theories. Let's look at transcription more closely. Transcripts are used because text as a medium is easier to search and navigate than audiovisual data. However, transcripts cannot capture the rich information about user behavior, emotions, and interaction from audiovisual recordings. Therefore, researchers may need to analyze the recordings directly, which can lead to inefficient workflows. To explore this problem further, we conducted interviews and a survey with qualitative researchers. We first wanted to understand how common direct analysis of audiovisual content is in comparison to transcript-based analysis. We find that only 12% of the analysis rely upon transcripts exclusively. Of the rest of the analysis, 55% use recordings only for corrections, but 32% use recordings substantially. Overall, the traditional text-based analysis is not sufficient for a third of the analysis. Therefore, we conclude that direct audiovisual analysis is very common. We next wanted to understand what researchers look for in audiovisual recordings. We found that mostly they look for interesting segments in recordings that need further analysis. Let's consider a hypothetical study to understand this better. Assume that we want to conduct a study to understand how productive college students are. We collect some screen recordings from our students when they are studying. When we view one screen recording, we observe that this student is diligently working on a report, but at a certain point, they get distracted by a notification. We want to understand how students handle distractions, so we look for more instances of such notifications. We call these interesting segments that we want to analyze inspectables. We use this term because these segments need to be further analyzed or inspected to derive meaningful insights. At this point, you might be wondering, well, why can't we just log all the notifications and use this to find the inspectables? Remember that we found notifications to be of interest only during the analysis, so we couldn't have planned ahead. Since researchers can't use system logs to find inspectables, what do they do instead? When available, they use visual or auditory cues that signal the presence of these inspectables. To understand how this works, let's revisit our hypothetical study. We want to analyze the segments in recordings after our user receives notifications like this. These segments in our recordings that inform our research are what we call inspectables. Since email notifications have a characteristic sound, we can simply look for instances in the video during which the following sound occurs. This auditory cue is an example of a detectable. These are audiovisual cues that can be more easily detected in recordings than the inspectables themselves. To reiterate, we want to find and analyze interesting segments in the recordings, which we call inspectables. These inspectables are usually indicated by the presence of audiovisual cues, which we call detectables. The detectable in our hypothetical study is concrete, but that is not always the case. For example, nonverbal cues can be quite difficult to find. However, if our analysis involves detectables that are concrete and can be easily found using simple computational techniques, we propose to automate this step. In our hypothetical study, we can perform simple audio processing to detect instances where the characteristic notification sound occurs. This gives us potential instances of detectables. Indeed, there would be false positives that need to be removed manually. But such automation can help researchers find inspectables without having to watch several hours of audiovisual recordings. It is important to use techniques that are simple, explainable, and repeatable because this would increase the trust in the automation process and improve the reproducibility of the analysis. In summary, qualitative audiovisual analysis involves finding and analyzing interesting segments in recordings, which we call inspectables. As researchers cannot plan ahead to capture these inspectables, they look for audiovisual cues, which we call detectables, in order to find inspectables. Simple computational techniques may help find detectables and thereby improve the qualitative analysis workflow.